Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are happy that you are with us here today for what's going to be a very busy show. Probably the most interesting thing today is the fact that we're going to get a chance to hear from both quarterbacks that are vying to be the Georgia starter. Vandagriff, Carson Beck, they both met with the media yesterday. You can hear the entire interview on the DawgNation YouTube page. I don't have time to play every clip from that for you, but we are going to play a handful of clips from both these quarterbacks here today to kind of give you an idea of what their mindset is as they continue to be a part of this quarterback competition. That is going to be very interesting. Also, special guest stops by before we're done today. We'll hear from Mr. College Football himself, Tony Barnhart. Always enjoy having Tony on the show sometime during the spring, kind of give you the outlook of the rest of the SEC and how Georgia fits into that story. Tony, always a great voice and stuff like that. We'll do that here coming up in just a couple of minutes. And on a Wednesday, as per usual, it's DawgNation's Mike Griffith. Mike had some interesting reporting off the weekend about some of what he heard about the Georgia scrimmage. We'll get into that, what Mike thought about both these quarterbacks who spoke to reporters yesterday, so a lot to do on that front too. And off the top, this is one of those things that can now be admitted, the truth sort of coming out about a source of motivation for Georgia's national championship season. I think this is kind of funny, and it's certainly very fun, so we'll do that right here off the top and then get into quarterbacks after that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We have already talked a good bit about quarterbacks here this week, and before the show is done today, we're going to talk a lot more. In fact, we're going to get a chance to hear from these quarterbacks here today. Carson Beck, Vandagriff, both meeting with the media on Tuesday night. You can see the full interview on the DawgNation YouTube page, but I'm going to play you some of the clips here today. It's kind of an introduction on that of mindset of both these guys as they get ready to vie to be the Georgia starting quarterback. Some of that we'll see on G-Day coming up on April 15th. By the way, on sale now are G-Day tickets. I already heard from some Dog fans today that have gotten theirs, so if you want yours, head on over to the official site and you can get that done. Those tickets now on sale to the general public. However, before we get to anything involving quarterbacks today, I want to do something different here for a moment. I think one of the funny things that kind of came out of the national championship for Georgia this past season was how much Georgia seemed to have a chip on its shoulder about what it perceived to be doubters of the team, doubters of the program, haters, if you will, who sort of thought that Georgia was unworthy of winning a second straight national championship. And this kind of created a little bit of debate among some fans and plenty of media about how true any of this was. Did Georgia really have doubters this past season? Were there really naysayers around this program saying that Georgia couldn't do what it did, which is go 15-0 and win the national championship in emphatic fashion, 65-7 against TCU? Well, certainly plenty of the Georgia players believed this to be true. I'll give you an example. You've heard this before. Stetson Bennett calling out those doubters, even though in his mind, some of them were trying to hide under rocks and pretend they didn't exist. Stetson says, I know you're out there, and he said that pretty clearly after the national championship game. Here is Stetson Bennett from going back to January.
This is what we set out to do this year. There's a lot of people who doubted us. A lot of people who, and I know people are gonna be like, "Well, no, we didn't." Well, yeah, you did. Maybe not doubted us as far as unranked doubted us, but there wasn't a consensus, and it seems as if people have forgotten that storyline and forgotten what this team has done as a collective. Fought through that and heard all the doubters whenever we're talking about 15 draft picks lost to the draft, and a lot of those guys over there on defense and even on offense heard that, and so we went to work and we took it week by week, and now we're here. So I think that's really special.
So that's a pretty matter-of-fact statement from Stetson Bennett. Bennett, I think, clearly believed there were people who didn't think that Georgia was going to be able to get it done this past season, and maybe that impacted a guy like Stetson more because he had been hearing doubters his entire football life, including even after he led Georgia to a national championship in 2021, that somehow he wasn't going to be good enough to do it again. So maybe Stetson's a little bit more sensitive to stuff like that because of the level of doubt that he's always dealt with. But it's pretty obvious that Stetson, as a representative for Georgia's 2022 team, pretty obvious that team was motivated by what they perceived to be doubters, people who believed they weren't going to be able to get it done. However, in the immediate aftermath of the national championship, some folks were sort of thinking that maybe some of Georgia's perceived doubters were exaggerated a little bit. Their existence was kind of conjured up out of the imagination of some Georgia players, because on the field there in L.A., there had been all kinds of talk about, hey, y'all were saying we were going to go 6-6, and y'all were saying we're going to go 7-5. And one of the guys that was saying that the most was Nolan Smith, who obviously was injured, not able to finish his senior season there at Georgia, but still, continued to be one of Georgia's most important vocal leaders and probably no better articulate spokesman for the program. And on that national championship field there in L.A., he was the one that was going around saying the most about, oh, y'all said we're going to be 7-5. Well, we proved you wrong, and we won the national championship. And there were some media types who were like, now, hold on. Come on. Maybe there were some people that didn't pick Georgia to win the national championship, but nobody really picked y'all to go 7-5, did they? Nobody really said you're going to be 6-6, did they? There was a little bit of a kind of a push and pull on that in the immediate aftermath of the national championship game. The idea that somehow inside the program, whether it be Nolan doing this or Kirby Smart doing this or somebody doing this, that somehow the notion of Georgia being doubted, or the degree to which that Georgia was being doubted, that some of that might have been exaggerated. Well, guess what? Now that we're several, months away from the national championship, the season's been over now for quite some time, I guess now the truth can come out. Now it can be told. And I guess Nolan Smith is now admitting what a lot of folks thought they knew at the time, which that Nolan Smith was exaggerating the degree to which he was saying that Georgia had been doubted, and maybe kind of using that to push on his teammates who may not quite be as media savvy as Nolan is. They may not quite be watching as many, online videos or reading stuff online, things like that. And when Nolan was saying this, they just happen to believe it's probably true because Nolan was telling them. But Nolan made a recent appearance on the podcast. It's Saturday Down South. You may be familiar with that. I'll put a link to the full interview when I post the show here at DawgNation.com. But Nolan, in this recent interview with Saturday Down South, admitted, yeah, a lot of that stuff I was saying and a lot of that stuff I was using to get my team motivated, yeah, I guess I was just sort of making it all up. This is Nolan Smith admitting that the source of some of Georgia's motivation this past year may have been a little bit manufactured by him. I think this is really funny. Take a listen to Nolan Smith.
Yes, yeah. You got to create their own narrative, man. Sometimes, you got to put the chip on your own shoulder. But we did have a humongous target on our back, as we saw in the Missouri game. Yeah, sometimes you got to juice it up for the guy, especially when you're old man last year. I just wanted everybody to know. I said it the whole summer. They're going to think we're going 7-5, guys. They ain't even thinking about a 2P. So
you made that entire thing up. You just picked that out of the air. You're like, all right, I'm just going to throw 7-5. That sounds disrespectful enough.
Yeah, 7-5 is like disrespectful enough. And that's what like Coach Smart did. I think not to disrespect any of the other teams, but I think Coach Smart went like 8-4, like his first year. So I was like, yeah, 7-5 though sounds better. And it sounds better off the tongue. 7-5.
So there's Nolan Smith saying, yeah, I made the whole thing up. But look, in defense of Nolan here, though, for a minute, and now he's, obviously just kind of playing along with this and having fun with it, saying, yeah, I made this all up. But in defense of him, just for a minute here, if you go back and look at the last offseason, we chronicled all of this as it took place. There were people at the beginning of the season saying, are we sure that Georgia can beat Oregon? Are we sure that Georgia's going to be able to handle all this? First game without these 15 draft picks. If you want to go back and find examples, there were people who thought that Oregon could challenge Georgia. Now, on this show, we picked Georgia to shut the Ducks out, and they almost did. But there were plenty of other people who were saying, are we sure that Georgia's ready for Oregon this soon after losing all those players and, all the whatever else? Dan Lanning, maybe he knows what Georgia's going to be doing. He's got some tricks up his sleeve because of the time he spent there at UGA. You can find people who thought that Georgia might struggle against Oregon. You had, Takeo Spikes, SEC Network analyst during the summer, that predicted South Carolina to upset Georgia. That's the second game in which there were at least some in the media saying that Georgia could lose this past season. Now, Takeo, I think, was sort of pushed into making the hot take because it was kind of a sort of his first year on the job, whatever else, kind of got pushed into that hot take, and he eventually sort of recanted it, I guess, and apologized for ever having said it. But if you want to go back to SEC Media Days, Takeo Spikes was sitting right there on that desk on the SEC Network saying, yeah, I think that Georgia's going to lose to South Carolina. You had Chris Doering, who's not a rookie analyst. He's been doing this for a long time. He had Georgia losing to Kentucky. You can go on and on and on. Before the Tennessee game, how many people thought that Tennessee was going to beat Georgia? The entirety of the media had seemingly aligned against Georgia, picking the Vols there on that day. So maybe no one officially predicted Georgia goes 7-5, but you don't have to find you don't have to look very far to find evidence of Georgia being picked to lose this game or picked to lose that game or picked to lose whatever game. That the honest truth is that Georgia probably did face more doubters this past season than a reigning national champion should have had to deal with. And I think it's important to keep in mind for this upcoming year too, which is that media types don't like having the same opinion as everybody else. It's not very interesting to say, oh yeah, the team that's won the last 2 national championships, they're going to come back and make it look easy and win this one again in 2023. That may be true, but the media is just going to be in search of a more interesting opinion than that. So last year, Georgia was fueled by its doubters, and it seems like all those doubters would have been squashed after Georgia went out and went 15-0 and won the national championship again. But my guess is that's not going to be true. Now, it may not be anyone picking Georgia goes 7-5. As Nolan Smith said, nobody really picked Georgia goes 7-5 last year either. But will somebody somewhere try to chase some clout by picking Georgia to lose this game, picking Georgia to lose that game, or picking Georgia not to win the SEC or not make the college football playoff? Of course that'll be the case. Almost certainly that will be the case. And you know what? I hope that Georgia takes the mindset this year that it took a year ago. All those people who want to be, reluctant to the idea that Georgia's climb to the top of the sport is inevitable, all those people who push back against that, then use those doubters as fuel. What is it the posters say? Make your haters your motivators, if that's what you need to do, because it clearly worked for Georgia very well in 2022. My guess is there'll be some of that in 2023, and I hope there's someone like Nolan Smith on this year's team to help use that as motivation all over again. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us live on video. 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon every single day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast, wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We try to make this show as accessible as possible for all of you, and we appreciate all of you joining us as a part of that. And of course, all the chances we have of making the show, putting it out there, helping, you access the show wherever you are, great studio, great equipment, things that I don't even know how to use. All of that made possible because of our great sponsors. Big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who bring this show to us here today. They're the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That means you can choose for your pest control, your bugs, your critters, your termites. You can choose the same company that takes care of UGA on all this kind of stuff. And the great news is when you choose a company like that, resources the likes of which Breda Pest Management has, they're trusted by UGA. You're also going to get a great benefit for yourself when you do that. The fact that they've been around since 1975, the fact they got 100-something different employees, the fact that they've got such a wide range of resources, such a large and successful organization, they're going to allow you to leverage their strength by saving you money instantly for making that decision. When you make the choice to switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, for instance, you're going to put more money in your pocket right away just for making that decision. That's what Breda Pest Management is all about. So please make sure you find them online. It's BredaPest.com. That's BREDA, BredaPest.com. And the same company that UGA trusts to take care of its pest control and its bugs, its critters, its termites, and everything else, you can trust them as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. Breda Pest Management. Find them online, BredaPest.com. One more time, that's BREDA, BredaPest.com. All right. Busy show for us today. We're going to look forward, before we're done today, to welcome in Tony Barnhart. He's Mr. College Football, a guy that's been around the SEC long time, deep, close relationships with so many SEC coaches. We're going to talk to him about how Georgia fits into the landscape around the rest of the SEC. We are going to do that today before our show is done. I'm really looking forward to that here before it's all said and done. Also, Mike Griffith back on the show on a Wednesday as per usual. A lot to discuss with Mike as it relates to Georgia spring practice. All of that coming up here in just a couple of moments. Also, maybe before we're done as well, an example, said before that somebody somewhere is going to be doubting UGA at some point in time. Maybe we have an example of a little bit of a snub of Georgia that sets the stage for hey, that chip that Georgia had on its shoulder last year, kind of getting that back. We'll give you an example of that maybe before we're done here, coming up in a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go around the DawgHouse here today. And yesterday was really fun, especially last night. Got a chance in Athens to hear from both of the Georgia quarterbacks currently vying to be the starter. Now, we understand that Gunnar Stockton's having a very good spring, and we believe that Gunnar Stockton has a very bright future as Georgia quarterback. For now, though, it seems like in the upcoming season, 2023, the battle to be starter is between Brock Vandagriff, Carson Beck. Gunner's obviously much younger than those guys are, so his time in the sun may come later on, but it's Vandagriff versus Beck for right now. And it sounds like both these quarterbacks have performed pretty well thus far this spring, which is nice to hear. But in terms of their own evaluation of how they performed, on the DawgNation YouTube page, you can see the full interview with Brock, the full interview with Carson, and get their wide-ranging thoughts. But there is some of this I want to share with you right now from both these guys. Starting with Carson Beck here, because he's the oldest. We'll go with him first. I guess alphabetical order-wise also works to play him first there as well. Starting with Carson Beck here on this, about just how his experience at Georgia has aided him and kind of how that has allowed him to kind of get comfortable as he tries to take that next step towards being starting quarterback here this spring. Here's a little bit from Carson Beck last night.
Obviously, a big part of that is reps and experience and getting into games. And last year was really big for me. Obviously, Stetson had a great year and went out on top, which was awesome. But he did really well in certain games. We got up big. I got to, get some experience in a few of those games. So I guess the biggest thing I would say is just having the experience and continuing to grow on that with, further reps and the more practices that we get.
Sometimes the simplest point is the truest. In this particular case, I believe that's right for Carson Beck, that, and we've said this many times, that in the battle to be Georgia's next starting quarterback, the idea that Beck had some game experience a year ago is quite a weapon in this battle. Now, that alone is not enough to guarantee him to be the starting quarterback. This is not a constitutional plan of succession. He doesn't just sort of step up because the starter moved away. That's not quite how it works. You still have to compete. But in that competition, the notion that you have experience, big difference between 0 and 1, big difference between something and nothing, and the fact that Carson Beck has some experience in this particular situation is very valuable for him, and it probably does give him a leg up, makes him a favorite, if you will, over Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton, simply because he was in games a year ago, and those immediate initial butterflies that you have when you step onto the field for the first time, maybe he got some of that out of his system there a year ago. That's real. And as far as the fact that Beck, now going into his fourth year at Georgia, being around Stetson Bennett, being around this Georgia program, what he's learned from the quarterbacks that he shared this quarterback room with in previous years. And Carson Beck says, from Bennett and from everybody else, he's actually learned a pretty good bit. Here's Carson Beck again.
Yeah, I think every quarterback that's ever come through this room, I've been able to learn from. And that goes for even the guys that are in here. Everyone is so different at the quarterback position, and it's such a unique position because there's no one body frame, one body type, or one way that you're supposed to play quarterback. There's so many different things and different aspects to being a quarterback. So I'd say I've taken little bits and pieces from every quarterback that's walked through this room.
And y'all don't discount this. I mean, when you look at the very best quarterbacks in college football the last couple of years, a lot of those guys had to wait their turn to play. Best example of that's probably a guy like Joe Burrow, who was sort of buried on the depth chart at Ohio State, went to LSU, and gosh, he may have been the best single-season quarterback in college football history. That's a guy who waited for his moment and then took full advantage of it. Even to a lesser degree, look last year, guys like C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, who may be the first two quarterbacks taken in the upcoming NFL draft. These are both guys that spent a year on campus learning, watching, waiting before they finally got their chance, and then they took full advantage of it when they got their opportunity. Stetson Bennett, obviously, much the same way. Scout team quarterback in 2017, eventually a junior college quarterback, a guy who played very, very little in 2019 as Georgia's backup, but when he got the chance to show what he was all about, clearly the experience he gained by watching Stetson Bennett eventually put to good use. So Carson Beck's time waiting and watching, that's not idle time. That's valuable time. If Carson Beck has used it to its full extent. It's a time to learn. It's a time to see what worked, what didn't work. It's a time to say, I'll take a piece of this quarterback, and I'll take a piece of that quarterback, and a piece of this quarterback, and then it'll help me kind of build up authentically who I am as a signal caller. That time in the system can be valuable for Carson Beck if he's used it wisely. Every indication we have is that he has. And then finally from Carson Beck, his own evaluation of how he feels his performance has gone thus far this spring. Here is Carson Beck again.
I thought it's gone good. I think the biggest thing is just trying to get better each and every day. Have the right attitude coming out and focused on me and what I can do, physically, mentally, building relationships with teammates. We got a few new guys out there, trying to get to know them better and connect with them on a deeper level. Because, that's really what it comes down to. We're a team, we're a family, and just trying to take that role and keep getting better.
Yeah, so the one thing, and I think I said this yesterday, and just to be completely honest, it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on here. And, I try not to be too cynical, but obviously you can't help but have a little bit of skepticism sometimes creep into your thought process. In other words, is this just Carson Beck's job and all of what's going on right now is sort of an orchestrated competition to make it seem like Carson Beck just wasn't chosen by default, that he actually had to earn this to keep Brock Vandagriff involved in the program so it doesn't transfer? Is this all just sort of a paint-by-numbers orchestration of a quarterback competition so that everything sort of sounds the way it's supposed to sound? Or is Brock Vandagriff really pushing here? Is he really challenging here? Is there a chance that there is an upset winner for the Georgia starting quarterback competition? I would sort of hold out the belief that, yeah, maybe the latter really is true here, and maybe Vandagriff really is making a case for himself and making an argument that he does have a legitimate chance of being a trusted starting quarterback for Georgia this season. Because if that is true, everything that Beck just said there is all the more important. That you can't just rest on your experience and you can't just lean on your time served in the program, that you're not just getting the job because of seniority, that you've got to go out and actually improve on what you have been, because you've got a guy like Brock Vandagriff who's trying to take full advantage of his opportunity there as well. In other words, is it a real competition? I certainly hope it is. Is Brock Vandagriff pushing to be the starter? I certainly hope he is, whether that actually ends up happening or not, because if that really is the case, then all that means is that the eventual starting quarterback for Georgia is just that much better. Now, as far as the Vandagriff part of this, hearing from Brock yesterday for me was probably more interesting than hearing from Carson, because Brock's one of those guys, and we've said this a million times, as the number 3 quarterback, a couple of years removed from high school, you sort of become a little bit out of sight, out of mind. You sort of become one of these guys that you sort of forget about a little bit. I don't know, that sounds harsher than I mean for it to, but I guess you become less sure of what you have in Brock Vandagriff once he goes a couple of years without playing. So I think that Vandagriff has been among the more interesting stories for Georgia thus far this spring. And yesterday, Vandagriff had a chance to kind of tell his own story and talk about, kind of what he brings to the table as a quarterback. In fact, let's let you hear a little bit of what Brock Vandagriff had to say yesterday.
When it comes to decision making, it's just all about being consistent and just not going like this right here. And at the quarterback position, you got to have somebody like that's this right here, whether that's the physical aspect or the mental aspect. You just got to stay the same and just stay consistent during practice. When stuff doesn't go your way, you can't make a bad play, a catastrophe. That's what Coach Bobo always tells us. And I think that's something I've been getting better at, is just making sure I stay the same and not having great plays, really bad plays, just keeping the same, just trying to keep hammering the nail.
I think that line of thought from Vandagriff means something, because if we're doing like punt, pass, and kick competition here, if it's just a measure of skill set, I'm not really quite so sure any quarterback at Georgia matches the overall skill set for Vandagriff. Big, tall, good-looking athlete, big arm, runs well. That if all we're doing is measuring, then Vandagriff might win on the measurables. But as you know, listen, there's a lot more to the quarterback position than just how athletic you are or how well you throw it or how far you throw it. It's also about kind of knowing what to do with the football and not being overwhelmed by the moment. And as Vandagriff quotes Bobo as saying, turning a bad play into a disaster, into a catastrophe. And I think what Vandagriff probably describes there is his own personal mission right now. In other words, in order to be a viable starting quarterback at a place like Georgia, you have to pair decision-making with the athleticism. There is a requisite level of athleticism you have to have, otherwise you're going to be overwhelmed by the defenses that you're facing. But athleticism alone can't get the job done for you. You also have to know what's going on. You have to know the Georgia offense. You have to know what to expect from the defenses. You have to kind of know how to handle the moment of being a quarterback. There is a cerebral part of this position that's just as important as the athletic part of this position. That's what makes quarterback so special, the idea of a quarterback so special. And what Vandagriff describes there is, I'm guessing, the journey that he's on right now, showing that his ability to understand what's going on is just as built up as his own athleticism, which I think is probably pretty prodigious. And then along that line a little bit more, Vandagriff kind of talked about his journey getting to Georgia. The idea that, hey, he didn't play at a 7A school in Georgia. He came from a lower classification, a single A school. But in his mind, that doesn't put him at a disadvantage of competing with any quarterback. The guys on the Georgia roster or potentially other SEC quarterbacks that he could do battle with as a starter. Vandagriff says that his journey to get to Georgia does not put him at a disadvantage. Here is Brock again.
I don't know. I feel like whenever you think about like stuff like that, I feel like it's kind of relative. Just maybe you're at a smaller school like single A. Maybe your O linemen aren't as good, like, and you're having to do this, and this, and just I feel like, hey, whenever you get to SEC, the D linemen are a lot better, your O linemen's a lot better, and stuff like that. And guys are faster. That was the main thing for me, is just it's tighter windows and throwing the ball. Tighter windows, you got to be more. Timing's more important. Your dude's not gonna be able to sit there open for 3 seconds before you give him the ball because he's gonna be covered. But just the game flow and the game speed has been probably the biggest transition, and it helps being able to go against one of the best defenses in the country every day of practice.
Everything that Brock Vandagriff says there is 100% true. Quarterbacks have come from everywhere. They've come from the largest classification in Georgia. They've come from the smallest classifications in Georgia. They've come from Georgia. They've come from every other state there as well. That if quarterbacks could only be produced in one area, in one size of school, then those are the only quarterbacks that ever get offers. But we clearly know that quarterbacks of all stripes, all varieties get attention. And if you're good, a school like Georgia is going to find you. So the fact that Brock went to a smaller school near Athens, he could have also gone to Oklahoma, could have gone to about anywhere he wanted to, that his background does not put him at a disadvantage. I think he's absolutely right about that. And I also think that what he describes there in terms of what the name of the game really is of, hey, ultimately, can you throw a football into a tight window? Do you trust yourself enough to even release the football in a situation like that? And can you get it where it needs to go? That is the ultimate differentiator on all of this kind of stuff. High school football for these kinds of quarterbacks has a way of sort of looking easy, but when it's no longer easy, can you still thrive? And I think that Vandagriff's absolutely right about that. And then one more from him in terms of his mindset and kind of how he tries to approach all of this and not getting, frankly, too overwhelmed by the stakes of this particular this competition. Once again, I think this is really good from Brock Vandagriff.
I would say it hadn't really ever changed. I mean, everybody's going to say that they have belief and trust in themselves, and I base a lot of my life on my faith, and I believe that God has a plan for me regardless of where I'm at or what I'm doing, and that's never changed. I believe God has a plan for me, and I'm gonna be here, and I'm gonna do my job every day and what's asked of me and control the controllables.
So let me wrap this up this way. There's a lot about this quarterback competition I'll admit to not knowing. I don't know what's really happening behind closed doors. I hear certain things. You hear certain things. How real is that? We don't really know. Who's the ultimate winner here? You may say, I don't really know that either right now. I guess I probably would say that too. But let me tell you what I feel like I do know. I like both these guys. I do. And I don't know that I really felt like I knew much about either one of them, at least as much as I do now, kind of prior to this spring. But when you hear Brock yesterday, that's a guy that's pretty easy to root for. When you hear Carson Beck, you know his story. He's waited for his moment. He feels like this could be it. That's a pretty easy guy to root for, too. Gunnar Stockton one day, kind of feel the same way about him. But for now, focusing on Carson and Brock, I like both these guys. And I'm starting to believe the potential certainly exists that whoever emerges as the Georgia starting quarterback, the Dogs could be in good hands here this year. That is Around the DawgHouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. The guy that was in the room yesterday, as both Carson and Brock spoke, that's our Mike Griffith. He's also had some interesting reporting as of late about what happened in that Georgia scrimmage on Saturday. So as spring practice rolls on, let's get more of that information from Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
A little late getting to Mike, and I apologize for that, but Mike, we had a chance to hear some of these quarterbacks before you joined us. Carson Beck, Brock Vandagriff. Interesting from both of them, and I kind of come away here liking both these guys. I'm still not quite sure what's happening in the competition between these two, but in terms of, as a fan, finding it pretty easy to root for Carson, finding it pretty easy to root for Brock, yeah, I think that's kind of the case here. It was nice to hear from them yesterday. I thought they both had pretty interesting demeanors and approaches to this particular competition. What did you think after hearing them both yesterday?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, these are two guys that are grounded. They know who they are. You feel like they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, and I think they present two really good options. I felt better about the quarterback situation after, learning about the scrimmage and seeing Kirby put both of these guys in front of us. That in and of itself was a statement that Kirby would choose these two guys to go in front of the media at this time. It's a healthy competition in earnest, and I don't think there's a bad answer here.
Kind of looking at this a little bit more broadly here for a moment, like the one thing I think people are kind of trying to figure out is how real is this competition? Because the one thing that we know is that Georgia would be saying a lot of the same things it's saying no matter what. There's a certain script that you follow when you're trying to orchestrate a competition. You don't want it to appear that your starter was kind of just named by default. You want him to earn the job. That theoretically pushes him to get better. And on the other hand, maybe it is a situation where Brock Vandagriff, a little bit less experienced, but very, very talented, maybe he really is pushing for playing time, and maybe he really could kind of jump the line here and become a starting quarterback. Maybe Carson Beck might have a hard time holding him off if Vandagriff kind of lives up to some of the potential that a five-star quarterback would be expected to have. So to put you on the spot here for a moment, how real do you think this competition is?
Oh, I think it's very real. I don't think Kirby himself knows. I mean, I think we would have a tendency to, say, Beck gets the first start on the seniority, provided that, he checks all the boxes. But there's a reason why they're splitting reps. I mean, quarterback coaches and coordinators, and we learned this, through Todd Monken, they're not there. I mean, this isn't rec ball, okay? It's not going to be 50-50, everybody plays. If they know who their guy is, they're going to give him, Stetson got the majority of the snaps. They knew he was the guy. He was getting 80% of the work. There was zero competition. And Monken's not playing games. It's like, look, let's get this guy ready. And the fact is they don't know who the guy is. They don't know who they can trust yet. They aren't completely sure exactly what this offense is going to look like. I mean, it's like they're building a machine, right? And before you can know who the right driver is, you kind of got to know what they're driving. I mean, how much quarterback run do you want? How much do you need to go downfield? What does the passing game look like? How good does the offensive line protect? There's a lot of components to this, and I think that it's all playing out. It's a process, and you have two really capable guys that have somewhat different skill sets, and which one will fit best, and then you evaluate the person. Like, which person do you trust? Which person will be the most consistent? Which person, represents, what Mike Bobo and Kirby Smart believe is best, the direction of the offense. I mean, I kind of look at it like, and this may be unfair because, there's only been one scrimmage and there's a very limited window of public viewing that we've had. But I kind of feel like Beck is a higher ceiling passer, but I feel like Vandagriff may have a higher floor. Maybe not as, I don't want to say mistake prone, but maybe not as likely to challenge it, more likely to throw the ball away. It's two different, and it's just a vibe I'm getting. Again, I don't know, and even Kirby Smart said, Brandon, he wants to see what they do in scrimmages, and he wants to see what they do in games. And when he said that, the light went on, and I said, you know what, we're going to see both these guys playing early in the season.
And obviously, Georgia got the kind of schedule where you could do that. We could probably spend all day talking about, games like South Carolina and at Auburn. If those games are tough enough that you feel like you need to know who your starting quarterback is, on the road at Auburn, almost certainly. South Carolina, by virtue of the fact they did beat Tennessee and Clemson closed last season, maybe. But when you think about, Ball State, Tennessee Martin, I guess UAB, first year for Trent Dilfer there. When you think about those games, clearly if Georgia wanted to play both these quarterbacks, and if you did want to make it rec ball and give everybody a turn, you could probably do that and be just fine. So is it your thought right now, obviously with room to change your mind later on, is it your thought right now this competition goes into the season?
I think so, right? And, unless somebody deals themselves out of it, unless somebody does something stupid off the field because, I think there's I don't want to say zero tolerance, but I think there's a very low tolerance for dumb mistakes off the field right now for obvious, well-documented reasons. I feel like that's a pretty tight ship over there. I think Kirby's, really doubled down on what it means to play for the G. We've heard the players talk about that level of commitment. We know there's a portrait of Devin Willock inside that building for a reason. Those players see it every day. So as long as everybody, takes care of themselves. I'll say this, the quarterback position, and it's the one where we give the most attention, and certainly it's integral to team success. I think Georgia's got, a lot bigger concerns in the quarterback position that I'd be more worried about in terms of trying to win a third championship.
All right, I'll talk to you about that. Let me give you one more thing on quarterback before we get there, though. And admittedly, this is a little bit of a crackpot opinion, but nonetheless, because I don't want to make too much of G-Day. G-Day is a little bit of a made-for-TV spectacle. All spring games kind of are. That's not – I would say that if you could be at the scrimmage this particular Saturday, you're going to get a lot more entertaining brand of football. That's real football compared to what sometimes you see a little bit more orchestrated for a spring game. That's not just true for Georgia. That's true for, true everywhere. But to the extent we're going to take G-Day seriously, here's what I'm going to tell you. I believe the format actually sets up well for a guy like Carson Beck. Brock Vandagriff is one of those guys that one of his most valuable commodities is his ability to use his legs, escaping a pass rush, keeping a play alive. Maybe you run, maybe you just buy time to make the throw. But on G-Day, when you're kind of judging what's a sack and you're blowing the whistle, and Kirby Smart's even talked about this before, a little bit harder to judge a guy like Vandagriff in a situation like that. So, Mike, I believe that there's a little bit more pressure on Beck because the format suits his style, I think, more. A little bit more pressure, I believe, on Beck to come out and demonstrate himself on G-Day to be clearly the better quarterback between the two. Because if that doesn't happen, then in my mind, fair or not, it just sort of opens the door for me to think, maybe Brock Vandagriff could be the actual starting quarterback this season, because once it becomes live football, tackling to the ground, at that point, Vandagriff becomes even more valuable in that style of play.
No, I think you're right, and all you got to do is look at the last couple of G-Day games. I mean, Carson Beck is looked really good, 2021 and 2022. You contrast it to Stetson Bennett, and he kind of stunk it up last year. He 15 to 35, 2 interceptions. But to your point, it wasn't his type of game, right? Because they blow the whistle early, and Kirby talked about you don't really have a run game. You can't really set up the play action, especially this year. We know that Kendall Milton won't be in that G-Day game, and Dejon Edwards has been dealing with a hamstring. You know that even if he plays, he'd be pretty limited. So you're not really going to have the benefit of a run game. I don't expect the offense to look real good, frankly, just, based on, what I'm hearing and how well the secondary is playing and the fact that you can't have a run game and the quarterbacks can't break tackles. So I'm kind of with you. I'm not anticipating some, shootout or anything that's going to dazzle me and make me come away and go, oh my gosh, right? Don't think you're going to see a ton of Brock Bowers or maybe even Ladd McConkey, right? You might see some of the younger guys you're still working in, the transfers, trying to learn the offense. Maybe Lawson Lucky, he may be a guy that shines. Oscar Delp, you might see some guys like that make some nice runs after the catch. Might see, Branson Robinson, Rod Robinson, maybe the young backs, run through some second teamers or something. But, I would agree with you that I don't expect this to be a quarterback spectacle. And I would think it absolutely suits Carson Beck more so than Brock Vandagriff or Gunnar Stockton.
So in the time we have left, you said that Georgia has bigger concerns right now than quarterback. Lay those out for us, Mike. What would stand as your top spring concerns from Georgia, kind of with a couple of weeks ahead of G-Day here? What sort of stands out as the bigger concerns for you?
Well, I mean, you lost two really special players that, Kirby, you're not going to replace. I mean, Kirby said it's impossible to replace what Kenny brought as a pass catcher, and you hear some people, amateur opinions, these guys can catch the ball. Look, you and I can catch an 8-yard swing pass out of the backfield, Brandon. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having a back that can run a 30-yard wheel route like Kenny or James Cook, guys that were catching the ball way downfield, where you get those matchups and, and these guys don't do that, okay? James and Kenny, their secondary MOS was as receivers. These guys are running backs catching the ball. And they're going to get better, but they're not going to do that. And that's going to be a component that's going to be missing. And it's one less thing the defense has to worry about. And then Darnell Washington. Look, there's plenty of good tight ends, but, they don't make them 6'7", 275, capable of crushing any defensive lineman and just creating matchup nightmares. I mean, you put a 235, 240-pound tight end out there, that's very different than Darnell. So you've lost two, players in Kenny and Darnell that you're just not going to replace. Now, that's not to say there's not going to be talent. You stick another receiver out there, less double tight end, more 3 wide receiver set. Okay, that's fine, but that's more conventional. There's more personnel out there that can match up with that. So, I would say Mike Bobo has less to work with than Todd Monken did in terms of toys in the toy box or tools in the toolbox or whatever you want to say. He doesn't have those matchup nightmare guys. So Georgia's going to have to be more conventional than they've been, and that's going to make them easier to defend. You lost both offensive tackles. Look, I love Amarius Mims, 5-star, I get it. Austin Blasky, hard worker. Ernest Green, quite the pedigree. But you're losing a first-round left tackle and a guy that started 37 games in a row at right tackle that did not give up 1 sack last year in 15 games. Those are big shoes to fill. And it's just, we just tick along, and, especially after last year, Brandon, they kind of feel, they lost 15 guys last year. They went undefeated. Okay, well, that's happened like once in college football history, and Georgia did it. You really want to push the odds and say you're going to lose 10, 11 more guys to the NFL, a six-year starting quarterback, a generational tight end talent, the most diverse, versatile running back in your school history. You're going to lose all that and go 15-0 again? So my point is there's work to be done. I think Georgia's going to win the East. I think Georgia's going to win the SEC. But I think they're going to take their lumps. And, the tackle position, losing that double tight end, losing a guy like Kenny McIntosh, and, the defense is good, but I don't see a first-round pick at defensive tackle. I just don't. Maybe Bear becomes that guy. But, last year we knew. This year, who's next man up? I mean, you got some solid guys there, but do you have game-changing interior defensive tackles? Ask yourself, in the NFL, count on one hand how many interior defensive tackles you can think of that are game-changing players. They just don't come along, and 88's gone. So those are my concerns.
Mike, interesting stuff. We appreciate you being here as a part of the show here today. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from you from Athens. Obviously heading towards another scrimmage, we think, on Saturday, and then G-Day coming up after that. So appreciate your time. Can't wait to read it there at DawgNation.com, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Look forward to it, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So what did I tell you? I told you this off the top of the show, that eventually some doubters would be coming out of the woodwork somewhere. I didn't realize the call was going to be coming from inside the house, but apparently that's the case. You hear Mike there. He says it. Pick him to win the East, I believe he said. Pick him to win the SEC, but he stopped short of saying, go on to win that national championship, whatever else. And once again, kind of sort of sounding the alarm on, what Georgia has to replace. And I'm not making a lot of that necessarily. Can we bring the music down just a tiny little bit, if you don't mind? I'm not making light of that, because I said this on the radio today. I was on with my friends in Athens, that I think last year, talking about 2021 transition to 2022, too much was made of what Georgia lost off the 2021 roster. Was an overstated talking point. I think this particular offseason, it may be somewhat understated, but this is what Georgia can use as a source of motivation. I think there's reason to believe the Georgia defensive line is actually going to be better this year than it was a year ago. Edge rusher spot, I think there's a chance this Georgia defense looks a lot more like what this team looked like in 2021 than it did in 2022. But already some doubt creeping in there, at least a little bit. We told you there'd be some. Maybe it's already beginning, and maybe that's a source of motivation for Georgia this year. We'll have to wait and see, and we'll have to wait and find out. Tony Barnhart, by the way, coming up in just a few minutes. We'll look forward to talking to him. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. DawgNation Cruise coming up. Man, I cannot wait for that, and so many of you are going to be on board with us. We can't wait for that, too. And so many of you also making your own plans to have your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. When you do, I'm hearing from you left and right that you're trusting Jessica Slater to help you do that. Great travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can sort of decide which of these Royal Caribbean cruise itineraries makes the most sense for you. Coming up in June with my family, we're going to be taking a 3-night cruise, which I'm excited about, kind of over the weekend, just kind of sort of laid back and casual. Our DawgNation cruise is a 4-night cruise. You leave on Monday, you're back on Friday, you're there for 4 nights. Great experience. And for some of you say, Listen, BA, I want to do what you did back in February. I want to take the 7-night cruise. I want to be on an Oasis class ship, the 7-night cruise. I want all that Royal Caribbean has to offer. Well, that's a great opportunity for you there as well. You could even be thinking about January 2024 and the debut of Icon of the Seas, too. A Royal Caribbean cruise ship, the newest in the fleet, kind of taking the cruise vacation experience to the next level, largest water park at sea. It's like a resort combined with a water park, combined with just basically everything. I mean, it's an unbelievable vacation experience, and Jessica can tell you all about that there as well. So one more time, give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. She'll get you booked up and ready to go for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here in 2023 or looking ahead to early 2024. All right, before we get Tony Barnhart, let me kind of roll through here a couple of things for our SEC through. I'm going to probably talk more about this at some point in time, but I saw there was this story at CBSSports.com looking at the most exciting freshmen for the upcoming spring games. And on the list of all the freshmen that were mentioned, you got Arch Manning and you got all kinds of names like that. But couldn't help but notice there wasn't a single Georgia player mentioned. And part of me is like, well, how could Georgia be back-to-back national champions? They had the number 2 recruiting class. They had 21 early enrollees off that class. And there's not a single freshman worthy of being mentioned by CBS Sports, and pretty long article of all these freshmen got mentioned from all over the place. Georgia didn't have a single name get mentioned, so it feels like a little bit of a snub there. And I would say it's also an example of sometimes the national media not being, as plugged in with what's going on here at UGA. I would say that most of us are very excited about seeing a good number of these freshmen here. I'll go back to what Terrence Edwards said last Thursday about Jordan Hall. That's a defensive lineman that's already earning a lot of buzz. Terrence saw him at practice. He had nice things to say about Hall. That's a freshman worth watching. I'd say a lot of us are very excited about seeing what Roderick Robinson brings to the table at running back, getting his chance with the injuries that have taken place in the Georgia running back room. Roderick's a guy that people want to see. Look at Lawson Lucky at the tight end spot. You say, maybe nationally tight end doesn't move the needle, but how valuable have you seen Georgia tight ends be? Brock Bowers, one of the very best players in the country. Darnell Washington, a likely first-round pick, a real catalyst for the Georgia offense a year ago. Guys like Lawson Lucky are going to be on display during G-Day. So we're going to probably do more of this before G-Day gets there, but couldn't help but notice CBS gave Georgia a little bit of a snub there, and part of that feels pretty incorrect, just to be completely frank there. I'm also noticing this right now. Have you seen the buzz that's starting to grow around an in-state quarterback from Langston Hughes, Prentice Air Nolan, class of 2024? He's been taking some pretty high-profile visits right now, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum seemingly growing between Nolan and Ohio State. Ohio State's obviously recruited the wide receiver position very well, and a lot of those receivers are now kind of turning to Air Nolan saying, hey, we need you to come be our quarterback, which once again is a little bit of a reminder of what we said yesterday, that pretty clearly the lines have been drawn here of what the expectations are for quarterback. Georgia has its commit in Ryan Puglisi, but it's also seeking Dylan Raiola right now there as well. And Georgia has been content to let a guy just a few miles down the road and Nolan be on the open market, took a visit to Clemson, being pursued now by Ohio State, and Georgia seems to be kind of okay with that. Fully focused in its belief that Dylan Raiola is the best available prospect here in this class of 2024. But it could be sooner rather than later maybe that we see an in-state guy like Nolan end up at a place like Ohio State or some other program of a similar stature. And yet Georgia has been content to let that happen while it keeps its full focus on Dylan Raiola. That is kind of interesting. Also, to follow up on a story we had the other day, so the Troy coach, whose name is John Sumrall, has said that he would be in favor of the idea that Hugh Freeze mentioned earlier about, hey, maybe we should be playing a different opponent than ourselves for our spring games coming up. And Troy coach says, yeah, we'll do that, and even kind of had some suggestions in his own right about kind of how that might play out. I like the idea of this maybe gaining some momentum. I still feel, though, the actual implementation would be far harder than it's currently being given credit for, because ultimately these Group of Five and FCS teams, they're not coming to these stadiums for free. And in the season, you can pay Troy $1.5 million to show up because you've got a TV contract and you've got a full stadium. But spring game attendance in most situations doesn't really exceed about 40,000 or so. That's a normal spring game type crowd. Maybe you'd get more if it was a real game, but I'm not quite so sure. People are pretty busy during the spring. And I'm not really quite so sure what the appetite for TV is. I mean, after all, you've got Colorado spring game on ESPN, you got Georgia spring game on ESPN2, and everything else has been kind of relegated to the streaming stuff. It's interesting to know that if ESPN wanted to promote these games and get a lot of attention around these games, these spring games, they could clearly do it. but for whatever reason, they just sort of choose not to. And I think it's worth asking why that is, but that's kind of the way that a lot of this sort of stuff sort of plays out from time to time. In fact, we also see examples of, like, this year Kentucky's not going to have a spring game. Anytime that lately when the stadium's been undergoing a lot of construction, like I guess is happening up there in Kentucky, they just sort of skip out on having the spring game. So if anything, it seems like the recent momentum has been more towards downplaying and downgrading the value of a spring game. But if we could ever swing the other direction and have something that more closely approximated real football, you better believe I'd be in favor of that. So good for Hugh Freeze waving the flag on this. And then real quickly, one more thing here before we bring on Tony Barnhart. Austin Simmons, the quarterback we told you about yesterday, who they call Muck Vic, he did commit to Florida. So Gators fans have something to be happy about, I guess, right now. And I told you yesterday, a lot of Florida fans have this sort of pie-in-the-sky thing. Oh, maybe he'll reclassify. Maybe he'll come in the class 2023. He is a 2025 quarterback. I don't know what's going to happen there on that. But I guess the one thing that Billy Napier can sort of point to his fans and say, hey, at least I'm doing this for you. I'm not winning games in the field. I haven't really mastered the transfer portal yet. The overall depth of the roster isn't quite what you want it to be either, but I have gotten you some quarterbacks. They do have a commitment from DJ Lagway for the class of 2024. That's a pretty big prospect. And now Austin Simmons, who they really like, kind of a top 100 level player out of the state of Florida for the class of 2025. So at least a little bit of success for Billy Napier when it comes to recruiting the quarterback position. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management this time of year, we always love catching up with Tony Barnhart. We call him Mr. College Football because really no one has had more insight into what's going on with the SEC for a great number of years than our good friend Tony has. And he's back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. Tony, thanks for spending time with us. We hope you're doing well and glad to have you back on the program.
Well, thank you, Brandon. It's always good to be with you.
I'm curious to know how you feel about this because you and I have been having these kinds of interviews now for a number of years, and I would say the tone of most of those interviews was, hey, how does Georgia break through? How does Georgia finally get over the hump? How does Georgia finally win a national championship? And now we're talking about Georgia trying to win a third straight national championship. It's clearly conquered the college football world. You've covered so many seasons. What is it like for you? Does it feel as surreal for you as it kind of does for me to think that the narrative around Georgia has changed as much as it has over the last 24 months?
It has been an amazing thing to watch, Brandon. But as you look at it, it's pretty clear that Georgia has done it. Kirby Smart is just a recruiting juggernaut and his staff. And the goal always was to put together multiple 3, 4, 5 recruiting classes so that when you do lose talent, you've got talented players to replace them with. And that's what you saw in Georgia last year. Logically, there was no logical reason that Georgia could win a second national championship other than the fact that they were talented enough to do it. And I think it's been an incredible thing to watch, and it makes life harder on the rest of the folks in the SEC. I was speaking to Buddy Martin, the Florida Gator, last night, and they are scratching their heads. What are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, you better upgrade that roster if you want to compete with the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world.
No, I think that's very well said. And when you think about the Georgia roster, one of the things I've said, Tony, is I think last year it was almost maybe overstated what Georgia had to replace off its 2021 team, that typically speaking, playoff national champions had made the playoff again the following year, so that maybe to a certain extent it was kind of overstated the challenge that Georgia would have about replacing those 15 draft picks. But if that was true a year ago, I've almost kind of come to the conclusion that maybe it's actually being understated this year, the fact that Georgia is without a quarterback who led them to 2 straight titles. Mm-hmm. It's without key leaders like Nolan Smith, Chris Smith on defense, that Broderick Jones on the offensive line probably had a way better season last year than a lot of folks realize, and that actually maybe even though people now assume that Georgia is just going to do whatever it takes to replace whatever it lost, that some of what Georgia lost off this past season's team is actually a little tougher to replace than maybe it's giving credit for.
I think that's very well stated. I think there you come a point where you just don't plug and play. Now Georgia was able to play a lot of guys last year who didn't get as much playing time, and they were very, very talented. But the question becomes there's certain nuances to putting together a football roster, and the question is will it catch up with Georgia? The X factor, though, Brandon, is when you and I are discussing all this, is when you look at the schedule. The schedule looks very manageable. Now, it's the SEC, and we understand, but when you raise those issues combined with the Georgia schedule, Is it possible? It absolutely is possible. Is it probable? Ask me after the transfer portal opens up again, and I'll let you know.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's kind of interesting here, because last year we had a spring portal season, and I think a lot of coaches, if I read between the lines here on this, I think they were actually a little disappointed that the spring portal last year wasn't a little deeper than it turned out to be. I don't know how many game-changing players entered the portal post-spring for whatever reason. This year, we have a specific window that opens the beginning of May, and I do think that's going to be really interesting to see, Tony, in terms of, hey, who leaves a roster that could help, or in the case of some of these teams, like you mentioned Florida earlier, you need some better players. Does the spring portal become a little bit better shopping experience than maybe it was this time a year ago?
Well, no question, because it doesn't stay open. There's a fixed amount of time that it is open. And if the coach wants to upgrade a position on his roster, he has a limited amount of time. Conversely, if a player wants to find different circumstances for himself, he's got to make a decision. He can't put it off indefinitely. So I think this portal season is going to be much different.
Let me ask you about the rest of the SEC here for a moment, because when I look around at what's happening right now, I see Alabama kind of getting the same level of conversation that we're used to them getting. Obviously, they're motivated to be better than they were in 2022. But I see a team like LSU that's got a second-year coach in Brian Kelly that actually won the West a year ago, that I think actually has two pretty intriguing quarterbacks. Maybe they have to choose between one of the two, or maybe they find a way to play them both. I see a team like Alabama almost getting more discussion than I feel like is warranted in comparison to a team like LSU that actually beat the Crimson Tide last season. How do you handicap that race, what I guess will be the final year in the SEC West? How do you handicap that race right now?
I think it's really close. It is really close. Now, the X factor when it comes to Alabama is after what they've had these two awful seasons of going to the national championship and then winning 11 games. I don't know how they're going to overcome that. And the thing about it is, we got to get some answers at quarterback. What's the offense going to look like? Will they be able to run the ball? All these kind of different things. But Brandon, I've got a gut feeling that Alabama's going to be there at the end of the season. But I also like LSU and what they did in their first year. Brian Kelly did just an incredible coach. After the opening loss to Florida State, when they did not look like a well-coached team at all, they got better. And as you mentioned, they did beat Alabama. And so I think it's definitely Alabama and LSU in the West. Who's going to have the edge? I like Jaden Daniels, LSU quarterback. I like that guy a lot. He could do some amazing things. It's going to be. I haven't made my pick yet, and I'm not sure I'll make it until after the transfer portal.
Sure. But
that's going to be an incredible race in the SEC West.
And obviously, the game on Georgia's regular season schedule that's probably going to get the most attention is going to be going to Knoxville in November. Sure. There's no doubt that Josh Heupel's made a name for himself as an offensive coach, and I'm guessing whether it be Nico, the freshman, or Joe Milton, who's been there, they're going to probably get really good quarterback play again. That's just what Heupel seems capable of producing. But I'm pretty skeptical about the ability for Tennessee to take that next step as a program. In other words, they're clearly good enough to make a game against Georgia or Alabama feel big, but other than beating Alabama a year ago, I'm not quite so sure I see enough roster balance to take the next step as a program. What do you make of what's happening right now in Knoxville and kind of what is kind of an important offseason for Josh Heupel going into year 3?
Well, you mentioned it. They're going to be good offensively, regardless of which of those quarterbacks plays. Does he go with the freshman? Does he go with the transfer from Michigan? I thought Milton played well. Milton's got a cannon for an arm.
Yeah.
Okay, so with Josh Heupel running the offense, they're going to be good offensively. Defensively, they're just not where they need to be, and you've got to be. You're just not going to outscore people in this conference consistently. The defense is what travels the best, and so I'm anxious to see if they make a step forward on the defensive side. I just don't. I can't see a scenario where they're going to beat Georgia unless the quarterback play is as good as they need it to be. But it's going to be fun to watch.
Before we let you go, Tony, this time of year you always have a great event that raises money for a terrific cause. I know this year's got a special tie for Georgia fans there as well. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the big golf event you have coming up here really soon?
Sure. for the last 7 years, Honduras Outreach that does tremendous work in Honduras for giving food, medical care, education to some of the poorest places on earth. And so our name, Maria and I, are we're sort of the chair people of the tournament. It's a Tony Barnhart HOI Invitational. This year will be special because we are dedicating this year's tournament to Coach Vince Dooley. Coach Dooley and Barbara in the last 5 years have been going to Honduras with great regularity to work with the folks at HOI. And matter of fact, when I was told that Coach Dooley was really planning to go back this March,
wow.
And obviously when we lost him in October, that didn't happen. So it's going to be special. We've got a lot of Georgia letters. We're going to have special ceremonies before we start the golf to honor Coach Dooley. Barbara Dooley will be there. We got a number. Frank Ross, the captain of the 1980 National Championship team, good friend, is going to speak for the Georgia Letterman. And it's going to be a very special day. If people would like to play in it, we've got a few teams left. But you can go to hoi.org, hoi.org, and you can sign up online. And we got a lot of celebrity guests. Wes Durham is going to be there.
Nice.
Mark Slaybaugh is going to be there. Danny Werfel's going to be there. Danny has supported us just about every year when he could. So it's going to be a great turnout. But it's at the St. Ives Country Club on Monday, April 17th. So we're about a little bit less than 2 weeks away. And if you'd like to be a part of it, it's going to be a special, special day. Early chance to talk about college football. And Aaron Murray is going to be there, support us. David Green is going to be there. And so we're really looking forward to it. But go to hoi.org, and you can sign up and play with us on April 17th.
And, Tony, when we post the show later on at DawgNation.com, I'll put a link in the post so folks can find out more information about this there as well. It's a great event for a great cause, and obviously a great tie to UGA's great legacy here in honor of Coach Dooley here right now there as well. So, Tony, thank you so much for being a part of our show today. Love talking college football with you. Love seeing you out there doing great work in the community there, too, and we'll hopefully get a chance to do that with you again very soon there as well.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. It's always good to be with you.
Good stuff there from Tony Barnhart, Mr. College Football, a guy so plugged in for such a long time and everything in the SEC. And that is a great golf tournament. It's kind of funny. This is kind of beside the point a little bit, but he talks about, right before Coach Dooley's passing, still planning on going to Honduras and still planning on being a part of that. It's one of the amazing things for me about Coach Dooley was just how active he was able to be like so late in life. I mean, 90 years old, that's an amazing lifespan, and really getting a lot of life out of even those like late 80s years. I mean, this was a guy that, because I'd done an event with Coach Dooley, I guess it was like about a year or so prior to his passing. I'm trying to remember exactly what that was, but like the next day after this event, he was going to Europe, and he was going over there and he like tour those battle sites and things like that. And this was a guy that was late 80s, only about a year or so prior to his passing, and he was still just out there doing it, and out there living life. And that to me is such an inspiration about just how much life he got out of his years. I mean, not only did he live a long life, but he got a lot of life out of even those very late years. And I could certainly say we could hopefully all be blessed enough to be able to say that for ourselves. So great event there for Tony Barnhart, making a lot of great memories, a lot of great Georgia guys, and also raising money for a great cause out there at a beautiful golf course too. And by the way, speaking of golf courses, also, when you think about this time of year, being on the course and enjoying all those kinds of things, you also think about our friends at the Finish Long Drink there as well. This is the time of year in which you're enjoying that, whether it be at a golf course or sitting in a patio somewhere or a back deck or something along those lines. You can enjoy that Finish Long Drink. And if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out all of the different varieties of Finish Long Drink to try, whether it be the cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, that's 8.5% alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. You want the blue can, the traditional, kind of comes with a little bit of a grapefruit flavor, kind of a gin kick. As I said before, a lot of golf courses, it's a great way to enjoy around. A lot of get-togethers with the neighbors, heading towards maybe watching the Masters and stuff like that this weekend. Finish Long Drink goes great with all of that there as well. In fact, when you're enjoying the Finish Long Drink, we could even make you a big part of our Big Finish presented by the Finish Long Drink on Fridays. We'll show you off enjoying some Finish Long Drink. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily with your photo. We'll make you a part of our Big Finish coming up a little bit later on this week. But if you haven't tried the Finish Long Drink, great time to do that. Go to thelongdrink.com and find out how you can enjoy this ready-to-drink cocktail. It looks like a beer because it comes in a can, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. You like mixed drinks, you're going to love the Finish Long Drink. So go to thelongdrink.com to find out more about that today. All right, great stuff from Tony Barnhart. Love having him on the show, and we'll kind of transition here to our close now, and we'll give you Golden Shoe. A little bit of a background on this. This week, we've had the great Kaylee Mansell, who's been with us now for a little while, but she's been kind of sitting in the big chair this week. Our normal producer, Michael Carvel's been on vacation. Kaylee has been running the show, have not skipped a beat. She has been seamless in her leadership of everything on the other side of the glass here, which I'm very, very thankful for. And she also put this out on Twitter yesterday. So I'm going to embarrass Kaylee and make this our golden shoe today. So she said it was her mom's first time watching the show yesterday. Definitely will not be her last, though. And she said some nice things about me, which I appreciate that. So love having Kaylee a part of the show. Happy to have Kaylee's mom tuning in to watch the show there as well. So I'll embarrass the Mansell family on that and say thanks all the way around. We'll give golden shoes there. By the way, lousy, stinking Gators, as Tony Barnhart said, they got real roster problems right now, and it doesn't get any easier. 206 days from now, that's the Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. So a lot of comments. We'll kind of roll through here. We'll get a few of these. Johnny Surf Dog says, good job, Kaylee. Yeah, Kaylee's been doing great. I will tell you that job is far harder than this job is. That just sort of winding me up and talking. It doesn't take much to do that. But back there's all kinds of buttons. We've shown you some of these things before. All kinds of buttons to push and stuff like that, and I don't have any idea how to do it. So if she got mad and went home, the show would go off the air. So I'm very glad that she is here today. I'm very glad for what Michael Carvel does for us on a regular basis there, too. Let's see what else is going on here. Georgia and Olive checking in. Good to see her. I guess they're talking about cats over here. So a lot of stuff going on in the DawgNation.com comment section. So they're having a fun little conversation over there, which you always enjoy being able to see. Let me go to Facebook, because I feel like I've been a little bit late getting to Facebook these last few days. So let me go over there and see what the Facebook folks have to say today. Over here. Here we go. On Facebook for a moment. Good to see Bill Sanders, Eric DeVornsey checking in. Appreciate that. Ken Holcomb says Tony Barnhart was a great interview today. Yeah, Tony's a great guy to have on. We like to have him on a few times a year. Always doing a great time. Jacob O'Neill says I'm not showing enough love to BA. I shouldn't say I'm not showing enough love to Facebook. Never show enough love. Jacob getting called out here, but maybe that's fair. I've been a little late getting to Facebook. You're right about that. That's probably fair. Denise White-Loper says, anybody heading to Augusta take some rain gear. Yeah, I heard rainy on Saturdays, but okay the next couple of days, right? Par 3 today, opening round Thursday. I heard the Thursday-Friday forecast was okay. Maybe that's changed. I was there on Saturday for the Augusta National Women's Amateur. Speaking of Michael Carvel, he'd given me some passes for that. It was heavy rain. I mean, heavy rain. It's kind of a mess, too, because, it's like if you can get in the course before the rain comes, then you're in good shape. But if you're stuck outside prior to that, they're not going to let you in. And they're not going to let you park either. And so you got to kind of handle all that. But, yeah, to go back to Tony Barnhart, we love having him on the show. Matt Rugavina kind of weighing the same thing. He said I should try to get Jim Nantz in the show. I'm a big Jim Nantz fan. I am. I like Jim Nantz. I know he's not the internet's cup of tea all the time, but I'm a big Jim Nantz fan. So if I could ever have Jim on, it'd be great to do that. There's not a huge Georgia football tie-in there because he doesn't do a lot of college football, but that'd be great. That'd be great. Cherie Byra checking back in. She has been out the last 6 weeks having major surgeries. Cherie, we hope you're doing okay. We're glad that you're here. Apparently you must be feeling good enough to join us. So I hope those surgeries have gone okay. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Randy Hall predicting that Jordan Hall be an All-American. So there you go on that. Seems like a fair assumption based on some of what you're hearing from Jordan right now. David Faulkner says the Michigan spring game said offensive football back 50 years. Yeah, they just had their spring game, right? Early spring game for them. That's kind of funny. Bill Sanders also on the subject of that Saturday forecast for Augusta. I heard that was not good. I heard the Saturday forecast is not good. William Camacho, we appreciate you checking in. Also, very nice things about the Dooley family. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Bill's going to Augusta today. Is that for the par 3? So I had a chance to do that a couple of years ago. I'm telling you right now, that is really fun. I kind of like par 3 golf anyway. You know, I'm sort of a better shorter iron player than I am longer irons, and so the par 3 courses, things like that, I just think they're fun. In fact, I think we ought to have more par 3 courses. You know, par 3 9-hole courses. I feel like there should be more of those in life, just in general. But I had a chance to go to the Augusta par 3 a few years ago, and I'm telling you, it's really fun. It's really fun. You know, Jack Nicklaus almost hit a hole-in-one like right in front of me, and just a lot of like really cool legends of the game, you know, mixed in with some of the current stars. It's just a great experience. If you get a chance to do it, you should. So I was on the radio yesterday with our friends in Atlanta, 92.9 The Game, and I was talking about this because I talked about going to Augusta this past Saturday. I've been to Augusta National 4-ish times, I guess, 3-ish, 4-ish, 5-ish times, something like that. You know, way less than 10, but a small handful of times. And here is what I've determined you sort of get when you go there. So when I think about the Masters, most of the time I think about it being the best event in golf. I think about it being the best event in the springtime maybe, but I don't necessarily think about it as being a Georgia event. But when you drive over to Augusta, now you realize, okay, well, not only is this the premier event in golf and one of the best sporting moments of the springtime, this is also one of our state's signature events there as well. And like driving from my house over to Augusta to go to Augusta National, you end up, I think, gaining a little bit of state pride here of, you know what, this is one of our better sporting moments as a state. And Augusta almost in the South Carolina line, but it ain't South Carolina, it's in Georgia. And so we'll claim it. Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain level of state pride there on that. And here's the other thing, too, that I think that if you care about golf, and if you don't care about golf, you don't care about this, but when you are at Augusta National, there is something else you gain a special appreciation for, too, which is that you really do see the layout of the course a little bit better. TV does not explain this. You see the layout of the course a little bit better, and you get a better sense of the fact that this was a course that was really designed to be like St. Andrews. You know, St. Andrews in Scotland, obviously, the link-style course where you have just like the wide open land, and you have lots of different ways to approach various holes. Augusta National is really laid out with that in mind. Now, a lot of that's changed over the years. They've planted more trees, and a lot of the holes on TV kind of present as basically like shotguns, right? You got trees on this side, trees on that side, and you're just kind of trying to split the difference. And when you're on the course, you really get a sense of the original design of the course being a lot more wide open, a lot more kind of laid out flat, like a links style course. You just see more of that when you're on the scene there. And so there is a greater appreciation gained for the course and for the event when you're there in person. Obviously, it's very expensive to go, typically speaking, so and also just very exclusive. You're lucky to be able to get a hand on some passes, but if you ever can get them, it's definitely worth it. Definitely worth it. Gary Holt says this team might even be better than last year, and I'm not even afraid to say it. Yeah, so Gary, I sort of think that's true too. And one of the things I try to be careful of is I try not to do any like unnecessary like sort of rah-rah hype stuff because Georgia's good enough as it is. Georgia doesn't need me to overhype it. It's already pretty good. But Gary brings up a point that I think is fair, which is that you can sort of chart out on paper and point to a lot of areas in which Georgia could have improved production from where it was a year ago. That is definitely a possibility. Definitely a possibility. So I think that I'm kind of one – see if this makes sense. I'm sort of of the mindset that Georgia will either be way better than it was in 2022 and like just completely lay waste the entire sport, or somehow there's this unforeseen disappointment lurking that we have no idea about. I sort of see two very wild extremes potentially playing out here for UGA. So that's kind of where I am. That Gary's point of, hey, it does not take a lot of imagination to explain how Georgia could be even better this year than it was a year ago. But at the same time, there's also that kind of creeping, I don't want to say anxiety, but concern maybe about the fact that college football just has a way of surprising you, and weird things sort of seem to be possible when you least expect it sometimes. So that's kind of my mindset on this here right now. Now on YouTube for a moment. By the way, I'm lucky enough tomorrow get a chance to go to the home opener for the Braves. Really excited about that. Foster Moss says, who do you have winning the Masters? I've got John Rahm for the win, and it's supposed to be cold and raining Saturday, high of 55. I think Rahm is an interesting pick, and I think what some people are going to like about Rahm is he kind of comes off the radar a little bit right now. Clearly one of the best players in the world, but it seems like we just haven't been talking about Rahm very much lately. So you sort of look at this in categories. You may look at your category of kind of from the top favorites list. You know, do you go Rahm, for instance, over a repeat champion like Scheffler or a guy trying to break through like Rory? I think that if you're looking at that top favorite kind of category, Rahm is as good an argument as anybody. If you're sort of looking in that sort of next category, then maybe you're sort of splitting this up between, like, say, tour guys and live guys, because the live guys are going to be a hot topic here this week. I would say of the live crew, Cameron Smith would be, I would say, the most likely live winner. And I would say that even over a one-time champion like Dustin Johnson. In other words, I don't have my official pick ready to go here yet, but you're kind of looking usually from someone in that sort of favorite category, somewhere in that range of, like, say, 25-1. Then maybe somebody from the long shot category there too. If you want to get on down the list a little bit, this is a course where a history of playing well here typically matters, and a guy that typically plays pretty well at Augusta is a guy like Justin Rose, and a very exciting player. But if you're kind of looking for someone who's got a little bit of odds next to their name, a little bit of value, I'd look at Justin Rose a little bit. That's not a pick to win it, but that's a guy that if you're kind of thinking about your kind of a long shot type pick or something like that, from somewhere in that odds range where kind of long shot sort of would be fair to say, a guy like Rose may be worth paying attention to. Ridgefly says, why are we not recognizing Nykar's commitment in the class of 2024? That's an elite wide receiver for UGA. He was a 5-star, but recently dropped to a 4-star. Guy's a baller. I think you're probably fair on that, Ridgefly. I think that Nykar is probably a better receiver prospect than he's been given credit for. I think part of this is sort of due to the fact that he's been committed to Georgia for a while, and the 2024 class is only just now taking center stage. I think that's part of what it is. But I do believe that for a lot of people who have said in the past, hey, why can't Georgia win with the kind of top flight receiver recruits? As you point out, I think that Nykar is actually a little bit of an example of Georgia kind of getting one of those recruiting wins. I think that Nykar probably is a better prospect than at times could be measured by the way in which he's discussed. Under-discussed, probably. I think you're probably fair to say that. DMart42 says Sokovie White's really underrated as well. Yeah, I like Sokovie a lot. And I'll be honest with you. I try to be self-aware. I have a little bit of a bias in favor of players that I just see. It's not possible to see in person every player that comes to Georgia, but I have seen Sokovie play a couple of times. And I do think he's really good. I do. I think he's another example of, it seems like that Georgia has really put an emphasis lately on getting really athletic. Obviously Georgia's always going to value size, but it seems like in some respects now Georgia wants to find more quick twitch, straight line speed athletes to go along with the very big guys that this program is going to always have a little bit of a preference for. And I think that Sokovie's a real example of that. I like Sokovie White a lot. And Ridgefly's point about Nykar is, hey, this is actually a really highly rated prospect that people don't talk enough about, which may be true. But in Sokovie's case, this is an example of a player who I think could potentially very much outperform his recruiting ranking. Sounds like he wants to play offense at Georgia, although I think he spent some time this offseason in some of the camp circuit and stuff doing some defensive back work. He does both for Cass. I think that Sokovie's a good player. I do. I think he's a very good player. Paul Moon says if you order DawgNation Daily merchandise, you just have to have your video chat preference stitched onto there. I like that, Paul. That's pretty funny. Fred Gunn says that Griff was a doubter last season. Griff kind of had some doubts again today, too. Maybe that's who Georgia's thinking about when they're doing all this bulletin board stuff. Maybe that's the case. Cassie Turner likes the idea of the YouTube loyalty there, too. I kind of like that there as well. Tennille, who we see in our comment section, a few years ago, she had those. I don't even know that Facebook does this anymore, but they used to have the top fan badge that you earned, and we never did figure out like what you did to earn one, and then eventually somebody would lose one. Facebook, I don't think, ever really explained what that was about. But for a while on Facebook, there was a status that you could earn called top fan. So you were a DawgNation top fan. And honestly, we had no control over this at all. And I think that Facebook's probably done away with it, I think. Anyway, she had the DawgNation top fan badge hats made. I'll have to bring that in and show that to you. I know I showed it at the time, but I was actually looking at mine because she sent me one the other day. Or she sent me one the other day. I was looking at it again. So there was some Facebook gear that was made at one point in time. And also our good friend Miriam Corbin, who celebrated a birthday yesterday, she and some of those folks had those hats made of like tailgate we did like a long time ago. She had some special hats made for that there as well. A handful of those folks did. Let's see what else is going on here. Justin Huey on the subject of C.J. Allen. Yeah, C.J. Allen's one of those guys that he's just less famous than Troy Bowles because Bowles has a famous last name, and Raylan Wilson because Raylan Wilson has this like massive recruiting ranking and kind of coming from that big time program in Florida. I think the people who follow recruiting, Bowles and Wilson, were just a little bit more famous than Allen is. But we had folks telling us during the year last year that, my gosh, C.J. Allen's an amazing, amazing talent. And it seems like thus far during spring practice, he's really demonstrating that there as well. C.J. Allen may be a very, very big-time player, Georgia. Very big-time player. Paul Moon says, I think that Ra and Rosemy Jackson ain't going to be the two main outside receivers for Georgia. I guess that's certainly they're going to be on the field a lot. But, Ladd mostly played outside there as well. It seems like we've heard a little bit less about Ra than we have about Dominic Lovett. I'm curious to see a little bit more of what Ra does bring to the table. Let's go Brandon, going to call it the Nightmare at Neyland. I like that. That's a good name. I like that. Frank Patterson, the subject of kicker. If I'm guilty of anything, I don't talk about the kicker enough. I probably don't. Georgia had a very good one for a long time in Jack Leslie. I don't know that we talked about Jack as much as we probably should have. And I would say trying to figure out between Zirkle and Peyton who the new kicker is going to be, that's a pretty big topic. We probably have not talked enough about it. I'll take that. I think that's fair. Jonathan Aaron says, who is the best quarterback in the last 12 years, in your opinion, who did not get a national championship? That's interesting. Oh, I guess are you trying to get Bryce Young? Is this a knock on Bryce Young? That's pretty good. I like that, if that's the case. Andrew Hughes on the subject of a T-shirt. Andrew, let me see if I can find out more about that. BJ's on vacation right now, so let's talk about this again in a couple days when he gets back. We'll see if we can figure that out for you. Let's see what else is going on. Paul Moon says, didn't we move Ladd outside out of necessity? Maybe so, but he also seemed to perform pretty well there too, whereas Dominic Lovett seems like he's kind of like that classic slot style receiver. Maybe they're going to just, roll those guys around a whole bunch. I don't know. Cassie Turner says you could make some DawgNation Daily chat buttons for the cruise or something. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. You could have a big tug of war on the cruise ship between like the Facebook and the YouTubes and DawgNation.com folks. That'd be a pretty good idea for sure. Frank Patterson, the subject of the Ole Miss game. Yeah, Ole Miss is an interesting opponent for Georgia this year. There is a chance that Ole Miss is, decently good, I guess. I think a lot of this is going to depend on how their quarterback situation plays out. Does Spencer Sanders, who I believe was brought there to win the job, does he truly do that? But it is entirely possible that Ole Miss is a top 25 team when Georgia plays them. That's entirely possible. Let's look at the Ole Miss schedule here for a second. Could they be undefeated coming to Athens? Because to me, Ole Miss, like, this would be an example of what we've had the last couple of years. Because before the 2021 season, everybody would have said, oh, this is an awful home schedule, worst home schedule that Georgia ever had. But by the time that season played out, and I'm not trying to be an apologist here, I'm just pointing out what happened. So prior to the season, everybody would have said, oh, 2021 home schedule for Georgia, oh, this is gross, this is embarrassing. But when it was all said and done, game day came to Georgia for 2 consecutive home games. So the Arkansas and the Kentucky game were at least big enough that they were able to host game day in back-to-back home games. That's not something that happens very much. The atmosphere for the Arkansas game was amazing. The Kentucky atmosphere is really good in its own right. So that actually ended up being a far better year in reality than it appeared to be on paper in terms of the excitement of the home games. Last year, that was definitely true because prior to the season, we would have said, okay, we thought 2021 was bad, but actually this 2022 home schedule is even worse. Worst home schedule Georgia's ever played. Well, when it was all said and done in November, Georgia ended up playing the biggest home game in the history of the program. And the unbelievable atmosphere for Tennessee that day, the total dominance of the team that was laughably ranked number 1 at the time, but on a home slate that appeared to be pretty miserable, Georgia ended up playing the biggest home game the program had probably ever had. That's 2 years in a row in which disappointing home schedules actually ended up rewarding you more than you realized. Could the same thing happen this year? Well, let's look. So Ole Miss has Mercer to open the season. They actually play at Tulane on September 9th, and there's a chance that Ole Miss is an underdog on the road at Tulane. They play Georgia Tech, and then they play at Alabama. Oh, gosh, they have a – wait, is this right? So Georgia doesn't play Ole Miss till November. I thought the game was earlier than that. So listen to this stretch for Ole Miss. So they go to Alabama, LSU, then Arkansas, then off, then at Auburn. Yeah, so I'm guessing that I was thinking the Ole Miss game was earlier in the season than this. So if Ole Miss is still ranked in the top 25 after playing all that, not playing Georgia until November 11th, if they're still ranked in the top 25 after all that, then Lane Kiffin's really figured out a way to do something. But Frank's initial description of a little bit of a trap game for Georgia, because that game for Georgia in November 11th is going to come – is that after the Tennessee game? That's the week before the Tennessee games. Yeah. So it's Ole Miss before going on the road to Tennessee. That could be a trap game. Frank's initial description probably better fit for that game than what I said of. Could that be sneaky a big game? But if Ole Miss is still ranked after that schedule they played, then something really special is going on there in Oxford if that's the case. Paul Moon also on the subject of that Georgia secondary, Dalen Everett. It says if he keeps looking the 5-star part, then we had to have Starks and Bullard at safety, Tyke at star. It's going to be nice. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the competition's actually been pretty good there at cornerback, but I would guess that Everett's probably still the favorite to win it, I guess. And then DMR42 says, and then when Kamari Laster goes pro, you got guys like A.J. Harrison ready to step in for him. Yeah, I mean, the secondary for Georgia has the potential of being very, very deep, of course. Very deep. And then it seems like, you talk about Nyland Green. It seems like Nyland's probably had a pretty good spring. I feel like we've heard some good things about him. For sure. Johnny Surfdog says with the strength of Beck's arm, our downfield passing game is going to be sizzling. And really it's the receivers that whoever eventually emerges as the Georgia starting quarterback, it's the receivers they get to throw to that could be really fun this year too. That could be very much the case. Yeah. When I came over here, the first time DawgNation.com, they're talking about pets and things like that. I didn't quite know what was going on there. Ken Holcomb says there are still top fan badges for DawgNation. Well, that's nice to know. Glad to know those still exist. Speaking of Facebook, back over here for a minute. Jeff Ingram says we are assuming Tennessee is great. Well, I'm not assuming they're great. I do believe they'll probably be good. If I had to guess, I think that Tennessee's probably this year about what it was last year. I could see them going 10-2. I could see them beating someone they maybe shouldn't beat. Last year that would have been Alabama. I don't believe it'll be Georgia. But I could still I could see Tennessee being pretty good. At Florida, I'd be surprised if Florida were to win. Texas A&M home game. You may say they lose at Alabama, they lose to Georgia, but couldn't you see them going 10-2 other than that? Rematch, revenge game against South Carolina. That's a home game this year. Texas A&M, I don't really quite know if that's a team that can compete with them right now. They're at Kentucky. That's not an impossible game. I'd probably be thinking about Tennessee, going about 10-2. Now, what you got to be careful of is if you lose to Georgia again, if you lose the road game to Alabama, you just can't get tripped up by somebody else, because that's the thing where a guy like Josh Heupel, who's kind of like the belle of the ball right now up in Knoxville, that's what kind of gets you taken down a peg. Because all of a sudden then, if you were to lose one of these non-exciting SEC games, well, all of a sudden the Tennessee fan pairs that with, and last year you also gave up 63 to South Carolina. And some of that excitement that Vols fans feel about their program, it just dissipates a bit if you lose a game this year you're not supposed to. Now, I'm sure they probably expect to take the next step as a program, but I don't see that being there. But I could see them being 10-2 again. I think that Tennessee will definitely be good enough that the Georgia-Tennessee game in November will feel like a very big game. Tennessee will probably have a very high ranking again. Vols fans will be very into that game. They're going to want to get revenge against the Georgia atmosphere that was created this past season. I'm assuming that Georgia handles its business against the Vols, but I believe it'll be big enough that it kind of has a big game feel to it. All right, final comments. We got to go. Alan Hampton says, with the transfer program, any team's got the potential to be super competitive. And I guess that's what we're going to see is, is there an SEC team that's kind of trying to get back in the discussion? Could they use the portal this spring to get a player or two that really matters? Be worth paying attention to. Thomas Dew also asked about the Georgia secondary, how good will it be? And this kind of goes back to what some of our commenters were mentioning a moment ago. You're clearly sifting through a collection of very talented players to be a starter opposite Kamari Laster. But how good does that guy end up being? Javon Bullard, do you use him at star? Do you use him at safety? I think a lot of that depends on, who would be the other guy in the position that he doesn't go to. For instance, if a Janelle Aguero or someone like that was performing well enough at safety that you felt good keeping Bullard at star, well, at that point in time, buckle up, because that's a really very good secondary. But maybe it's Tyke Smith who plays well enough at that nickelback position, a guy who's been here now for a couple of years and probably had some setbacks when he first got here, tough transition to the SEC. Maybe he's ready to do something more in, I guess, what would be his final season at Georgia. Maybe that's the case, and so Bullard can be put at safety. I mean, Javon Bullard's going to be a great player no matter where you put him, I believe. It's just a matter of what's opposite him at the spot that he doesn't play. So I'd say that secondary is probably in pretty good hands. Hey, we're going to cut things off for now and get ready to wrap it up. We appreciate you being a part of the program. We'll talk about the Masters a little earlier. Day, Braves, baseball today. Check out the AJC for a lot more on that. All kinds of coverage from everything happening with the Braves. Trying to finish up in St. Louis, coming back for San Diego, in Atlanta tomorrow. Also the Masters pairing, if you want an easy spot to go to and read about the different pairings and the tee times there for that, you can check out ajc.com for that. A lot going on that you can check out here. Also, I guess today is the warmest day of the year thus far, so you can kind of get more details on the weather scenario there online, ajc.com as well. All right, RS Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including hot day like this. You want your air conditioning unit to be tuned up and ready to go, so find them online at rsandrews.com and get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. It only costs you $99, and you'll stay nice and cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. rsandrews.com for more on that. Great day. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.